Her job, in theory, should be to reassure all the bondholders that America is good for its debts, right? We're going to pay our debts, so don't worry, we will do what it takes to pay you, right? I'm the Secretary of the Treasury, and I'm going to make sure that we prioritize our bondholders. They're going to take priority because, that's the full faith and credit of the United States, right? We can't default on that. That would be horrific. So don't worry, about the debt ceiling. We will pay you. We will find a way. We will cut other spending. We'll do something, but we're going to pay. No, that's not what Janet Yellen is saying, right? Here's one quote from Janet Yellen. Quote, all I want to say is that it's Congress's job to do this, meaning raise the debt ceiling. If they fail to do it, we will have an economic and financial catastrophe that will be of our own making. And there is no action that President Biden, the U.S. Treasury, can take to prevent this catastrophe. And the catastrophe she is talking about is default on the debt, where the U.S. misses the debt payment. Now, if this is so catastrophic, why don't we just avoid it? Again, I've talked about how much tax revenue we have that's well in excess of the interest payments on the debt. Interest payments are something like, $300-400 billion a year. We're collecting 10 times that in taxes, $4 trillion. So we got plenty of tax revenue to pay our debts. But we're not saying we're going to use that tax revenue to pay our debts. No. If we can't borrow more money to pay our debts, then we're not going to pay anything. Again, an admission of a Ponzi scheme. But this is the last thing that you should be saying. I mean, we got people worried about the dollar, worried about the weaponization of the dollar. And we're telling our creditors, you're the low man on the totem pole. It's not really that there's the full faith and credit, because if you own a treasury, the only way you're going to get paid is if we pay everybody else and there's still money left over. Otherwise, you're SOL, right? If we can't go deeper into debt, nobody is saying, right? I haven't heard Janet Yellen or anybody say, you know what, if the Republicans don't raise the debt ceiling, we can't send out the Social Security checks. No, it's all about the debt. The only people who are going to get screwed are the people who own U.S. treasuries. Does that make any sense? Is that what the Secretary of the Treasury should be out there saying? Now, one of the things they're trying to say is that, we're going to use the 14th Amendment or something like that to get around the debt ceiling, because they're saying that, that amendment says that that U.S. debt shall not be questioned. But that's irrelevant to whether or not we have the money to pay. It's not about questioning the legitimacy of the debt. I mean, no one's doing that. Yes, the debt is legitimate. We just don't have any money to pay it, right? So to say that, we have to pay the debt and therefore we can raise the debt ceiling. No, if they want to prioritize the debt, they can do it. In fact, what Congress should be doing right now, and what Biden should be leading the charge, hey, where's the contingency plan? If we don't raise the debt ceiling, what government programs are we going to cut, right, so that we can pay interest on the national debt? What are we going to do, right? Because we have to do something. You can't just not raise the debt ceiling and not have a plan. So let's have a plan B. Okay, either we raise the debt ceiling, or here's all the government spending that we cut, right? And if we're going to default on the debt, let's lay it out. What's the haircut going to be? Who's going to, how much are we going to not pay? But then that is not something that we did to ourselves. We would have chosen to do that. If there is an interest payment that is missed on the national debt, it's because the government chose not to make the payment. They chose to prioritize something else, because somebody's going to get paid. It's not like no government checks are going to go out if they don't raise the debt ceiling. Checks are going to go out. They just have to figure out who gets paid. Like any business, you got to prioritize. Or if there's a company, that goes into bankruptcy and there's a trustee or whatever, and he's looking over, figuring out who gets the money, right? Well, if the government can't borrow anymore, right, it's technically kind of broke, so it's got to figure out who gets paid. But right now, they're saying that it's the bondholders who take the first hit, which means, U.S. treasuries are junk bonds. If that's your collateral, that you're last. See, normally bondholders are going to be higher up in the hierarchy of who gets paid. right? But now, no, they're low man on our totem pole. So why should anybody want to hold treasuries? I mean, you run the risk of inflation wiping out the value of the treasury. You run the risk of default. You run the risk of, having the U.S. weaponize the fact that you own treasuries against you and seize them for you. We've created so many reasons for holders of U.S. treasuries to want to get rid of them and, of course, get rid of the U.S. dollar. There's one more thing, too, that I want to mention that they're banning about the debt ceiling, and that's this $1 trillion, coin, this platinum coin they want to make, $1 trillion coin, and say, hey, we don't need to worry about borrowing money. We'll just mint $1 trillion coin and give it to the Fed, and the Fed will give the U.S. government $1 trillion to spend. And if we ever did something like that, it would really expose the banana republic that we're living in, because that would really be the government literally just printing the money, because the Fed would have no real asset on its books. I mean, right now, the Fed's balance sheet consists of U.S. treasuries on the one hand, and then it issues currency, Federal Reserve notes. So the Federal Reserve notes are backed by a U.S. treasury. But if the Fed will accept an ounce of platinum as collateral for $1 trillion, its balance sheet has a massive hole in it. What does it have on its balance sheet to stand behind $1 trillion? It doesn't have $1 trillion in U.S. treasuries. It's got an ounce of platinum. Then what's that worth? Not even $2,000. How could the Federal Reserve, if it ever had to shrink its balance sheet, what asset would it have to buy back those treasuries? A 1 ounce platinum coin? Who's going to take that? Who's going to say, yeah, I'll sell you my $1 trillion worth of treasuries and I'll take an ounce of platinum in exchange? Who the hell's going to want that? Nobody. If the Federal Reserve ever did that, it would be impossible to shrink the balance sheet, because at least when they have U.S. treasuries, somebody will take the treasuries because they pay interest, right? But who's going to take an ounce of platinum that pays no interest? And what are you going to do with it? You can't do. I mean, you got one coin that's worth $1 trillion. It's not like you could spend it. Where would you want to store that? It's basically what it would be like. It would be like a U.S. treasury in perpetuity that paid zero, right? Because there's no interest on it, but you can't do anything with it but hold it indefinitely and collect no interest. It's really a worthless asset because the Fed can never do anything with it. So it would mean a permanent increase in the money supply. So it's permanent inflation, and the Fed has no ability to ever withdraw that liquidity unless the government decides that it wants its coin back. But why should it ever want it back? If it could just mint $1 trillion coin and hand it to the Federal Reserve, why would it ever want it back, right? The Federal Reserve would be stuck with it. But this would expose, right, the whole fraud in this system, that it's just money printing. It's never going to stop. We're never going to get our fiscal house in order. Instead of all this talk about the fact that the U.S. might not raise the debt ceiling and the catastrophe that we're going to get if we don't raise it, all the press should be on the fact that we are going to raise the debt ceiling and the massive catastrophe that awaits us, not because we don't raise the debt ceiling, but because we do. Anyway, that's it for tonight's podcast. I look forward to the next one. I think we're going to do one midweek next week, just one podcast next week, and then I am off to Florida for a conference in Orlando. So I'm probably going to miss the Sunday podcast. This is George Gammon's conference. I've mentioned it before. So anybody who's going to be attending that, I look forward to seeing you down there. My son Spencer is also going to be there. In fact, the entire family is going to be down in Orlando for this conference.